The morning light crept through the blinds, casting a soft gold across the room as she stretched her body into a lazy dog pose. Her skin glistened faintly with sweat, the air around her heavy with the scent of lavender from the diffuser in the corner. Her dark hair, tied up in a loose bun, framed her face, a few strands escaping and sticking to her damp forehead. She wore a tight, strappy yoga top that clung to her frame, the fabric sheer enough to hint at the curves beneath. Her leggings, equally snug, clung to her hips and legs, the material accentuating the strength and grace of her movements. Yoga had always been her sanctuary, a time to center herself, to forget the weight of the world and the complexities of her life. Her breaths were deep and measured, the steady rhythm of her inhalations and exhalations grounding her. She moved into a downward-facing dog, her back arching elegantly, her focus absolute. The hum of the city outside was distant, almost soothing, but it was the creak of the door that shattered her concentration. She froze, her body still arched, her heartbeat quickening. Slowly, she turned her head, her eyes widening as they met her stepson's. He stood in the doorway, his frame silhouetted by the light from the hallway. His hair was disheveled, and he wore nothing but a pair of loose sleep pants that hung low on his hips. His bare chest was toned, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw giving him a rugged edge that she hadn't noticed before. For a moment, neither of them moved. She could feel his gaze trailing over her body, lingering on the curve of her back, the way her outfit clung to her form. Her breath hitched, her cheeks flushing as she noticed his hand subtly adjusting the front of his pants, his fingers fidgeting nervously. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice low and slightly hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken in hours. He took a step back, his eyes darting away from hers. "I didn't mean to. I thought you'd be done by now." She straightened up, her movements deliberate as she turned to face him fully. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. There was something in his expression, something she couldn't quite place that made her stomach twist with a mixture of emotions, guilt, curiosity, and something else she wasn't ready to name. "It's fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. "I was just finishing up." He nodded, his eyes flicking back to her for the briefest of moments before he turned and disappeared into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. She exhaled sharply, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water bottle. The room felt too quiet now, the silence pressing in on her. She tried to shake off the tension to tell herself it was nothing, but the image of him standing there, his gaze lingering on her, refused to leave her mind. When she walked into the kitchen later, he was already seated at the table, a bowl of cereal in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Hey," she said, her tone casual as she poured herself a cup of coffee. Her fingers brushed against the cool porcelain of the mug, trying to ground herself. "About earlier. I didn't mind you walking in. It's just I wasn't expecting anyone." He shrugged, his shoulders tense. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Yeah, I should have knocked or something. I didn't mean to make it weird." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "It's not weird," she said, though the words felt heavy on her tongue. "If you're interested in yoga, you could join me sometime. It's a good way to start the day." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, that sounds cool. I've been meaning to try it out anyway." She forced a smile, though her mind was already racing. "Great. We can start tomorrow if you want. Just maybe knock next time," she added lightly, trying to ease the tension. He chuckled a low, almost nervous sound. "Yeah, I'll remember that." The air between them shifted, the tension easing slightly, but the unspoken questions lingered. She sat down across from him, her mind already racing ahead, wondering what this new dynamic might mean for them and where it might lead. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, her nerves humming with anticipation. She dressed carefully, choosing a yoga set that was both flattering and practical, a snug tank top that hugged her curves and leggings that accentuated her legs. She tied her hair back, the loose strands framing her face, as she laid out an extra mat in the center of the room. The lavender diffuser was already filling the air with its calming scent, and the soft hum of the city outside provided a soothing backdrop. When he entered the room, she was stretching her arms overhead, her body warm from the pre-session stretches. He wore a fitted t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still damp from the shower. His expression was a mix of curiosity and nervousness, and she couldn't help but notice the way his eyes flicked to her briefly before he looked away. "Morning," she said, her tone light and inviting. "Ready to start?" He nodded, his voice quiet but steady. "Yeah, I'm ready." She guided him through the basic poses, her voice calm and encouraging. "Start with mountain pose. Feet together, hands at your sides. Breathe deeply." He followed her instructions, his movements a little stiff at first, but gradually becoming more fluid. She moved around him, adjusting his posture with light touches to his shoulders and back. Each time her fingers brushed his skin, she felt a jolt of electricity, her breath hitching imperceptibly. "Now, let's move into downward-facing dog," she said, demonstrating the pose with ease. She watched as he tried to mimic her, his form awkward but earnest. She stepped closer, her hands resting on his hips to guide him into the correct position. "Lengthen your spine," she instructed, her voice soft but firm. "Push your hips up and back," he complied, his body adjusting under her guidance. She could feel the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt, her fingers lingering for a moment too long before she pulled away. As the days passed, their yoga sessions became a regular part of their routine. Each morning, she chose poses that challenged him more, her choices becoming slightly more explicit. Poses that required balance, flexibility, and an undeniable connection between them. Warrior poses, bound angles, seated forward bends. They moved through them together, their bodies in sync, but their minds in turmoil. She began to notice how his gaze lingered on her during certain poses, his eyes tracing the lines of her body as she moved. It wasn't overt, but it was undeniable, a subtle awareness that grew with each session. And then there were the times when she caught him adjusting his pants, his discomfort obvious but unspoken. One morning, she wore a new yoga set, a racerback top that exposed her shoulders and leggings that hugged her hips and thighs. His eyes widened when he walked in, and he quickly looked away, but not before she caught the flash of appreciation in his gaze. They began with sun salutations, their movements fluid and synchronized. She demonstrated a pose, her body bending gracefully, and watched as he tried to follow. His form was improving, but his focus seemed elsewhere, his gaze drifting to her more often than she liked to admit. "Your alignment is better," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "But try to keep your gaze forward. It helps with balance." He nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, I'll try." As they moved into a more advanced pose, a twisted lunge, she noticed his breathing had become heavier, his cheeks flushed. She stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder to guide him into the twist. "Breathe through it," she said, her voice soft but commanding. He exhaled slowly, his body relaxing under her touch. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the tension in his muscles as he held the pose. When she pulled away, she caught his gaze, the intensity in his eyes making her heart skip a beat. The sessions became a dance of push and pull, their mutual attraction growing harder to ignore. She started choosing poses that brought them closer together, their bodies brushing against each other as they moved. Each touch, each glance added to the tension that hung between them like a heavy weight. One morning after a particularly intense session, they lay side by side in Savasana, their breaths slowly returning to normal. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the diffuser and the sound of their breathing. "You're getting really good at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned his head to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "It's different, but I kind of like it." She smiled, her heart fluttering at the sincerity in his voice. "Yoga is about balance physically and emotionally. It's not just about the poses." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand that." Then, almost casually, she made a suggestion that would change everything. It's getting a little stuffy in here with summer coming. How about we take our next session outside? The backyard would be perfect. There's more space and we can do it by the pool. The fresh air might make it more enjoyable. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, that sounds good. I've always liked being outside. Her heart quickened at his agreement, though she kept her expression neutral.
Great.
We'll start tomorrow then.
Bring a towel just in case.
The words hung in the air, innocuous on the surface, but loaded with possibility. As they left the room, she felt a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension, knowing that the poolside session would bring them closer, both physically and emotionally, than ever before. The next morning, the sun was already bright and warm, casting a golden glow over the backyard as she set up the mats near the pool. She had chosen an extreme bikini for the session, minimal and daring, with thin straps and a cut that accentuated her curves. The fabric was a deep blue, contrasting with her tanned skin, but its purpose was practical, she told herself. Yoga required freedom of movement, and the bikini allowed for that. At least that's what she convinced herself as she laid out the mats and adjusted the towels. When he stepped outside, she was already standing on the mat, stretching her arms overhead. He wore a pair of swim trunks and a loose tank top, his bare feet padding softly on the cool stone tiles. His eyes widened briefly as he took in her outfit, but he quickly looked away, finding interest in the surroundings. "Morning," she said, her tone casual, but her heart racing. "Ready to get started?" He nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, this is different." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "It's nice to change things up. The fresh air will do us good." They began with a simple warm-up, their movements fluid and synchronized. She demonstrated each pose first, her body bending and stretching with practiced ease, then guided him as he followed. The sun warmed their skin, the light breeze carrying the faint scent of chlorine from the pool. As they moved into more advanced poses, she noticed how his gaze lingered on her, how he seemed distracted by her movements. She chose poses that required her to turn her back to him. Downward-facing dog, pigeon pose, cobra, each one highlighting her form in a way that was impossible to ignore. Tension between them grew with each pose, the unspoken attraction simmering just beneath the surface. When they reached a seated forward bend, she glanced up and caught him staring, his eyes fixed on her as she stretched. He quickly looked away, his cheeks flushed, and she couldn't help but smirk. "Focus on your breathing," she reminded him, her voice soft but firm. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper.
"Yeah, sorry."
After the session, she stood and stretched, her body glistening with a light sheen of sweat. She turned to him, her tone casual, but her eyes sparkling with something unspoken. "That was a good session. How do you feel?" He hesitated, then nodded.
"Good."
"It's intense out here." She laughed softly, the sound warm and inviting. "It's the fresh air. It makes everything feel more alive." She walked over to the edge of the pool, dipping her toes into the cool water. "I think I'm going for a swim."
"You should join me."
He hesitated again, his gaze drifting to her as she stood there, the sun illuminating her form. "I didn't bring my trunks." She shrugged, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "The pool's private. No one's going to see." Before he could respond, she turned her back to him and unclasped her bikini top, letting it fall to the ground. She stepped out of the bottoms, her movements slow and deliberate, and waded into the water, the coolness enveloping her as she submerged herself. He stood frozen for a moment, his breath caught in his throat before he quickly pulled off his tank top and kicked off his swim trunks. She watched from the pool, her gaze lingering on his body as he hesitated at the edge. There was no mistaking the obvious arousal straining against his briefs, the sight sending a thrill through her. "Come on," she called, her voice teasing. "The water's perfect." He stepped in, the cool water lapping at his skin as he joined her. The pool was shallow enough that they could stand comfortably, their bodies close but not touching. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. She glanced down, her lips curving into a sly smile as she noticed the unmistakable evidence of his arousal. "Someone's enjoying the pool, huh?" His face flushed, and he looked away, his voice low. It's the water's cold. She laughed softly, the sound warm and inviting. Sure it is. Just relax. No one's judging you here. They swam together, the water cool and refreshing against their skin. She brushed against him occasionally, her touches light and teasing, her laughter warm and inviting. His gaze lingered on her, his admiration evident, but he said nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. You know, she said, her voice soft but laced with amusement. You're handling the situation quite well. Most people would have panicked. He looked at her, his expression a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Don't know what to say. She smiled, her tone playful. You don't have to say anything. Just enjoy the water. They swam in silence for a while, the tension between them still thick, but now tinged with a strange comfort. She moved closer, her body brushing against his, her gaze meeting his for a brief moment before she turned away. Her movements slow and deliberate. This is nice, he said finally, his voice low. She smiled, her eyes meeting his. It is. Sometimes you just need to let go and enjoy the moment. They stayed in the pool, the cool water enveloping them as the sun warmed their skin. The unspoken tension remained. But for now, they were content to let it linger, the possibilities stretching out before them like the endless summer sky. She moved effortlessly through the water, her body cutting through the waves with a grace that was hypnotic to watch. Each stroke was deliberate, fluid, and mesmerizing, her confidence radiating with every motion. He stayed close, his stroke slower, more hesitant, his gaze drifting to her more often than he cared to admit. Each glance fueled the simmering tension between them, a silent exchange of curiosity and desire that neither of them dared to put into words yet. She brushed against him frequently, her touches light and deliberate, her teasing glances and comments heightening the unspoken attraction. You're getting better at this, she said, her voice soft, but laced with amusement. Her tone was playful, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something that made his stomach tighten. Though I think someone's still a little distracted, his cheeks flushed, and he looked away, his voice low, almost a whisper. I'm trying to focus. She laughed, the sound warm and inviting, as though she enjoyed seeing him flustered. As she swam closer, her body brushed against his briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through him. Her proximity was intoxicating, her presence commanding. Focusing is overrated, she said, her words dripping with suggestion. Sometimes you just have to let go and enjoy the moment. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and he felt his heart quicken in response. She lingered nearby, her gaze holding his just a second too long before she turned away, her movements unhurried and deliberate. There was a power in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that drew him in like a moth to a flame. He couldn't help but admire her as she moved through the water. Her body illuminated by the sun, every curve and line accentuated by the play of light and shadow. The water clung to her skin, droplets glistening like diamonds as they rolled down her neck and shoulders. She chose poses and movements that highlighted her form, her every action calculated to draw his gaze and hold it. It was as if she knew exactly what she was doing, and he was powerless to resist. You know, she said, her voice teasing, breaking the silence once more. You're handling this situation quite well.
Most people would have panicked by now.
His face flushed deeper, and he looked away, suddenly finding the tiles at the bottom of the pool incredibly fascinating. I wasn't staring, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the water. She laughed again, the sound light and carefree, as though she were enjoying every moment of his discomfort. It's okay, she assured him, her tone softening just touch. I don't mind. Besides, it's not every day someone gets to enjoy this view. Her teasing was light, almost innocent, but it sent a thrill through him all the same. They swam together for a while longer, her occasional touches and comments keeping him on edge, the tension between them growing with each passing moment. Every brush of her skin against his, every shared glance added to the electric charge that crackled in the air. Eventually, she swam to the edge of the pool, her movements unhurried as she climbed the stairs. He watched her from behind, his breath hitching at the side of her body, the water cascading off her skin as she stepped out of the pool. The sunlight caught every droplet, turning them into tiny prisms that reflected the warmth of the afternoon. She turned slightly, her gaze meeting his for a brief moment before she reached for a towel, her movement slow and deliberate, as though she wanted to give him plenty of time to appreciate the view. She laid the towel down near the pool and stretched out on it, the sun warming her skin as she relaxed into the soft fabric. He stayed in the water, his eyes lingering on her form, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. There was no denying the chemistry between them, a magnetic pull that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. For now, the moment hung in the air unfinished, but full of potential. The sun continued to bathe the backyard in its golden glow, the gentle breeze carrying with it the faint scent of chlorine and the promise of something more. Whether or not they would act on that promise remained to be seen, but for now the possibilities stretched out before them like the endless horizon, limitless and tantalizing. He lingered in the pool, the cool water a stark contrast to the heat building inside him. His eyes remained fixed on her as she lay on the towel, her body perfectly framed by the sunlight. She stretched languidly, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were fully aware of the effect she was having on him. The soft curves of her body, the way her skin glowed under the sun, it was impossible to look away. She turned her head slightly, catching his gaze, and smiled, a small knowing smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Are you just going to stay in there all day?" she teased, her voice soft but laced with amusement. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "I thought I'd cool off a bit longer." She let out a low laugh, the sound warm and enticing. "Suit yourself, but the sun feels amazing out here." Her words were innocent enough, but there was an undercurrent of invitation in her tone that he couldn't ignore. He hesitated for a moment longer before finally climbing out of the pool, water cascading off his skin as he stepped onto the warm tile. He grabbed a towel and dried himself off quickly, his movements clumsy but efficient. She watched him from her spot on the towel, her gaze following his every move. When he was done, he hesitated, unsure of where to sit. The space next to her felt too intimate, too charged with the energy between them. "Here," she said, patting the towel beside her. "Plenty of room." He sat down tentatively, leaving a respectful distance between them, but she shifted closer almost immediately, her body brushing against his ever so slightly. The contact was minimal, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the backyard filling the air, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant chirping of birds, the soft ripple of the pool's surface. But none of that mattered. All he could focus on was her presence, her warmth, the way her body felt so close to his. So she said finally, breaking the silence, "What's on your mind?" He glanced at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, her gaze meeting his. "You've been awfully quiet since we got out here. What are you thinking about?" He hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "Just taking it all in, I guess." She smiled, her expression softening. "You don't have to overthink it, you know. Sometimes it's okay to just be in the moment." Her words were comforting, but they also stirred something inside him. The way she looked at him, the way her voice softened when she spoke, it felt like she was peeling back layers, revealing a side of herself that few ever saw. "You're easy to talk to," he admitted, his voice low. She raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Am I? That's good to hear. Most people find me a little intimidating." He chuckled softly. "I can see why. But you're not so bad, once you get to know you." Her smile widened, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Careful. You might actually start to like me." He met her gaze, his own smile fading as a more serious expression took its place. "I already do." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension between them thick and palpable. Then she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Good." Her breath was warm against his skin, her closeness intoxicating. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his senses heightened by her proximity. Every nerve in his body felt alive, every inch of him hyper-aware of her presence. She reached out, her fingertips grazing his arm lightly, the touch sending a shiver through him. "You're tense," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with concern.
Why?
He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his as if trying to read his thoughts. Then she leaned in even closer, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "Then maybe it's time to stop thinking and just feel." His breath hitched, his entire body tensing at her words. Before he could respond, she leaned back slightly, her gaze locking with his once more. There was no mistaking the look in her eyes. Desire, yes, but also something deeper, something that made his stomach twist in the most delicious way. The air between them crackled with anticipation, the unspoken tension reaching its peak. He knew they were standing on the edge of something intimate, something life-changing. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid to take the leap. But then she pulled away, her smile soft, but tinged with regret. "We should probably head back soon," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes betraying the lingering intensity. He nodded, his heart still racing, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice. "Probably." They gathered their things in silence. The tension between them still thick, but now tempered by a sense of mutual understanding. As they walked back toward the house, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. The towel draped loosely around her body as she began preparing dinner. The sizzle of vegetables hitting the hot pan filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the evening. He handed her a glass of whiskey, their fingers brushing briefly, sending a spark of electricity through both of them. Their conversation flowed easily, laced with teasing remarks and subtle flirtation. She laughed often, her voice warm and inviting, her eyes sparkling with mischief. He found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain, his admiration growing with each passing moment. At one point, he leaned against the counter, watching her cook with a curious smile. So he began, his tone casual but laced with interest. "What's the wildest thing you've ever done?" She paused, a playful grin spreading across her face as she turned to look at him. "Wildest, huh? That's a loaded question." He shrugged, taking a sip of his whiskey. "I'm just curious." She thought for a moment, her gaze drifting upward as if recalling a particular memory. Then she looked back at him, her voice dropping to a low, sultry tone. "There was this one time." His heart skipped a beat as she began recounting the story, her words painting vivid images in his mind. She spoke of a moonlit beach, a forbidden tryst, the kind of encounter that left a lasting impression. Her voice was soft but commanding, every word dripping with sensuality. By the time she finished, he could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, his pulse quickening with every syllable. "Wow," he said, his voice hoarse. "That's definitely wild." She laughed, the sound light and carefree, as if she hadn't just set his world on fire. "Your turn. What's your wildest memory?" He shook his head, chuckling nervously. "Nothing compared to that, trust me." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing playfully. "Don't sell yourself short. I'm sure you've got some hidden depths." He hesitated, then launched into a story of his own. A reckless road trip, a chance encounter, a night he would never forget. She listened intently, her gaze never leaving his, and by the end, he could see the appreciation in her eyes. Dinner was served soon after, a simple meal eaten at the small table by the window. The conversation remained light and playful, but the tension between them grew with every bite, every shared glance, every accidental brush of their hands. When they finished eating, he stood to clear the plates, but she stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Leave it," she said, her voice soft but commanding. He turned to face her, his breath catching as she stepped closer. Her eyes held his, dark and intense, and without a word, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both tender and demanding. His hands instinctively found her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Her body molded against his, the heat between them unbearable. He roamed her curves with his hands, exploring every inch of her as if trying to memorize her shape. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with desire, and without a word, she took his hand and led him down the hallway. The moment they crossed the threshold of her bedroom, the world outside ceased to exist. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting shadows that danced on the walls. The air was thick with anticipation, each breath charged with the electric energy between them. She turned to face him, her gaze unwavering, her lips slightly parted as if waiting for him to make the next move.
He didn't hesitate.
In one swift motion, he closed the distance between them, his hands finding her waist as his lips claimed hers in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. She responded instantly, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his with a fervor that matched his own. The kiss was deep, intoxicating, a collision of desire and longing that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, it was only to gasp for air, their foreheads resting against each other, their hearts pounding in unison. His hands slid up her sides, tracing the curve of her body as if memorizing every detail. She shivered at his touch, her eyes fluttering shut before opening again to meet his gaze. "Don't stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but laced with urgency.
He didn't need to be told twice.
His lips trailed down her neck, planting soft kisses along her collarbone as his hands explored further. She tilted her head back, a soft moan escaping her lips as he found the sensitive spots she didn't even know she had. Her hands moved to the hem of his shirt, tugging it upward until he obliged, pulling it over his head and tossing it aside. Her fingers traced the contours of his chest, her touch igniting a fire that burned hotter with every passing second. He returned the favor, his fingers hooking under the edge of the towel she still wore and letting it fall to the floor. The sight of her fully revealed in the soft light stole his breath.
She was breathtaking.
Every curve, every line, every imperfection, perfectly imperfect. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes drinking her in before stepping closer again. His hands cooped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek as he kissed her again, this time with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity of their earlier embrace. She melted into him, her body responding to his touch as if it were second nature. Her hands roamed his back, her nails grazing his skin lightly, drawing a low groan from him. The sound sent a thrill through her, and she pressed closer, craving more. They moved toward the bed in a tangled mess of limbs and feverish kisses, the world outside forgotten. When the backs of her knees hit the edge of the mattress, she sank down onto it, pulling him with her. He hovered above her for a moment, his gaze locking with hers as if silently asking for permission. She answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him down to her, their lips crashing together in a kiss that was both fierce and tender. His hands roamed her body, exploring every inch of her as if she were a treasure he couldn't get enough of. Her breath hitched as he found the most sensitive parts of her, her body arching into his touch. "Please," she breathed, her voice a desperate plea. He didn't need to ask what she meant. His hands moved with purpose, his lips following the path they carved as he worked his way down her body. Every kiss, every touch, every breath they shared was a testament to the connection between them, a bond that transcended words. When he finally took her, it was with a tenderness that belied the burning desire between them. Their movements were slow at first, a dance of passion and intimacy that left them both breathless. But as the intensity built, so did their pace, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. The room filled with the sounds of their ragged breaths, the rustle of sheets, the soft murmurs of their names. Time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing down to just the two of them, their connection the only thing that mattered. When it finally ended, it was with a release that left them both trembling, their bodies entwined, their hearts beating in sync. They lay there afterward, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Neither of them spoke, the silence between them comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of everything they had shared. Her fingers traced idle patterns on his chest, her touch soothing and grounding. He pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head, his voice low and rough when he finally spoke. "You're incredible," he murmured. She smiled, her fingers stilling for a moment before resuming their lazy exploration. "So are you." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, the world outside forgotten as they reveled in the warmth of each other's embrace. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them, and they drifted off to sleep, their bodies still intertwined, their connections stronger than ever. The soft glow of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a warm golden light across the room. He stirred awake, his arms instinctively tightening around her as he became aware of her presence. She was still asleep, her head resting on his chest, her breathing slow and steady. For a moment, he simply lay there, savoring the peacefulness of the moment, the weight of her body against his, a comforting reminder of the night they had shared. Slowly, he ran his fingers through her hair, the strands silky and smooth against his skin. She stirred at his touch, her eyelids fluttering open as she blinked against the morning light. When her eyes met his, she smiled, a sleepy, contented smile that made his heart swell. "Morning," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep, but still laced with warmth. "Morning," he replied, his voice low and rough. They lay there for a while, neither of them in a hurry to move. The world outside seemed distant, unimportant, as if the only thing that mattered was the space they shared, the connection between them that had deepened overnight. Eventually, she propped herself up on one elbow, her gaze sweeping over his face, as if committing every detail to memory. "Last night was," she began, trailing off as if searching for the right words. "Perfect." He finished for her, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. She smiled, leaning into his touch. "Yeah, perfect." They stayed like that for a moment longer, the silence between them filled with unspoken emotions. Then she sighed, rolling onto her back and stretching lazily. "I should probably get up," she said. Though there was no real conviction in her voice, he watched her as she sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist, her skin glowing in the soft light. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he had words for. "Do you have to?" he asked, half joking, but unable to hide the note of longing in his voice. She glanced back at him, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "Afraid so duty calls?" Despite her words, she hesitated, her gaze lingering on him as if she were just as reluctant to leave as he was to let her go. Finally, she leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his lips before slipping out of bed and reaching for the robe draped over a chair. He watched her as she tied the robe around her waist, her movements slow and unhurried. "Coffee," she offered, glancing back at him. "Sounds great," he replied, sitting up and running a hand through his tousled hair. She disappeared into the hallway, and he took a moment to collect himself. The events of the night replaying in his mind like a dream. Everything about it felt surreal, yet undeniable. The depth of their connection, the intensity of their passion, the way she had opened up to him in ways he hadn't imagined possible. He dressed quickly, pulling on his clothes from the night before making his way to the kitchen. She was already there, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air as she poured 2 mugs. She handed him one, her fingers brushing against his as he took it, the simple contact sending a spark through him. They sat together at the small table by the window, the morning sunlight streaming in and bathing the room in a warm glow. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable as they sipped their coffee and savored the quiet intimacy of the moment. Eventually, she set her mug down, her expression growing more serious as she turned to face him. "So," she began, her tone cautious but open. "Where do we go from here?" He hesitated, the question hanging in the air between them like a weight. Last night had been incredible, but it had also been unexpected, uncharted territory. He didn't want to rush things to ruin whatever was blossoming between them by pushing too hard or too fast. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I know I want to figure it out with you." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Then she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good, because I want that too." Relief washed over him, and he reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Then we'll take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just us. She nodded, her fingers intertwining with his. One day at a time. They sat like that for a while, the world outside moving forward as they stayed anchored in the moment. Eventually, she stood collecting their empty mugs and carrying them to the sink. He watched her, a sense of contentment settling over him as he realized just how much she had come to mean to him in such a short amount of time. "Breakfast?" she asked over her shoulder, her tone light and inviting. He grinned, pushing his chair back and joining her at the counter.
Sure.
"Need any help?" she smirked, handing him a carton of eggs. "How are you at omelets?" They cooked together, their laughter filling the kitchen as they navigated the chaos of making breakfast. It was messy, imperfect, and utterly perfect all at once. When they finally sat down to eat, the sun was high in the sky, the day stretching out before them, full of endless possibilities. They talked as they ate, their conversation shifting from light-hearted banter to deeper, more meaningful topics. It was as if the events of the night before had opened a door between them, allowing them to share parts of themselves they hadn't shown to anyone else. By the time they finished breakfast, it was clear that something had shifted between them, something profound and unshakable. They cleaned up together, the quiet domesticity of the moment cementing the bond they had begun to build. As they stood side by side at the sink, their shoulders brushing occasionally, she turned to him, her expression soft but filled with determination. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice steady, "we'll figure it out together." He nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. Together. And in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it hand in hand. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of something extraordinary.